planet's on fire. It's a real code red. Got us by the balls, we're being slowly bled. All the swollen puppet head, the propagandized. Big chocolate points, flat out lies. A house full of mirrors, it's a lousy reflection. Run hard left, it's a true direction. Democracy's in trouble, this news isn't fake. Everything we fought for is truly at stake. Border to border, coast to coast, it's time to view the talent and meet our host. It's a podcast by George. All right, folks, it's showtime.
Well, like everybody, eventually I'll get tired of that intro, I suppose, but I'm not right now. That's the new one. That's from Bob Pace. God, I love that. And it gets right to the essence of Podcast by George, news, blues, and interviews. That's some great blues from the great Bob Pace. And we're going to be talking news and interviews today. We've got Jeff Epstein coming back to the Podcast by George. And for folks that didn't see him the first time that we had him on, Jeff Epstein is the host of activistmmt. It's a podcast for nonviolent direct MMT activism, sharing modern monetary theory with the world and conversations about learning MMT together. His website is activistmmt.org. He's on Twitter at activistmmt. I'll run all these addresses on the screen as we go along, folks. And he's a frequent guest on independent media everywhere, and he returns now to Podcast by George. So let's bring him on in. Jeff, welcome back to a Podcast by George.
Hello, George. Thank you for having me on again. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you too, and thanks for coming on. And I thought of you immediately when I started to see all this news break about the debt ceiling. I mean, there's not much good news about becoming a gummer, which is what I am, Jeff, but it makes you a cynic because I've seen this movie before. I've seen this stuff numerous times, this debt ceiling crisis, as it's called. And it reminds me of the Russiagate and the Russians that were coming. I said, my God, people, the Russians have been coming since World War I, literally. That's when the first Red Scare in America was. They have never gotten here. They're not coming. It's not happening, and it is changing our world up until the present moment. It's all over cable news everywhere. And of course, right now, these bills are moving through Congress, and there's this big austerity push underway from the deficit hawks, and we're hearing about, again, the debt crisis. And I wanted to bring up on screen just one example of this to show folks what I'm talking about here. And this is going to be out of CNN. So look at this. This is the headline, Why October 19th? That's D-Day, folks. That's when we're all going to disappear. It could be a catastrophic day for the U.S. economy. There's Jen Psaki giving her baloney from the podium. Okay, New York, CNN Business. The United States could be just weeks away from defaulting on its debt for the first time ever. The $28.4 trillion debt limit was reinstated August 1st. Since then, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has been keeping the nation's finances afloat by using emergency accounting measures, known as extraordinary measures. These steps allow the government to borrow additional funds without breaching the debt ceiling. But Yellen warned lawmakers this week that if Congress fails to raise or suspend the debt ceiling, the federal government will exhaust those extraordinary measures by October 18th. And my God, if that doesn't scare you, I mean, that'll scare the bejabbers right out of you, Jeff. I'm thinking though that probably for you, that's probably not that terrifying.
Oh, it is terrifying.
It is.
Oh yeah, no, sure. Of course, it's terrifying.
The result, yeah.
They're choosing to default is terrifying.
Yes.
And it's like they're choosing to do it. They're choosing to do it. They don't have to do it. They're just choosing to do it. So yeah, that part is terrifying. But they don't have to choose to do it. They can choose differently if they want to. So why don't they choose differently?
And the thinking is, now there are some malcontents. I've even saw some interviews with some people in Congress they're kind of giddy over this. It's kind of like they want to stick it to us a little bit and actually do this, as you mentioned. But we've been to this precipice before. And the overall effect of this is kind of to condition us, I think. And this kind of goes to the heart of your philosophy on MMT and why it's being denied and what the oligarchy, the powers that be, are doing to us with things like debt ceiling.
It's so we have debt ceiling, we have how are you going to pay for it, we have inflation, the boogeyman, these fears that are brought up. And yeah, each of them are scary because we choose for them to be scary. The reality of how things actually work means that we can choose differently. If you understand how the economy works, then we could choose differently. If you understand that the debt ceiling is a choice, it's not an inherent reality, then we could choose differently. The debt ceiling is a choice. They don't have to have the debt ceiling. They choose to have the debt ceiling. And they choose to have this threshold, it's an artificial threshold that if we go above it, then we break the law. But they create the laws. They could choose to change the laws. They're the only entity in the world that can create and enforce and delete the laws, which means to them, it's essentially a New Year's resolution. It's to us, we can't change the law. We don't have the power to do anything about it. They make the law. They can change the law. They choose to have this law. Why do they choose it?
Well, you've just written an outstanding article, and I want to bring that up on screen too and kind of walk through this and hit the highlights of it because it lays it all out in terms that even I can understand. And I want to encourage folks to make some comments or ask questions of Jeff, and we'll get those on the show here.
Oh, great. Great.
Time.
Before you bring it on, you're actually a big inspiration for me updating. I wrote a small version of this article, which I sent you originally, but you got me studying it further, and that article completely blew up because of my research. So this is significantly inspired by you.
All right, great. Let me see if I can get this on screen. We never know how the technology is going to work here, so let's see how we can get this up. Here it is. So let's bring this in. Okay, now this is, as I mentioned, this is the activistmmt.org website that Jeff is the host of. Fears of U.S. government shutdown as debt ceiling game of chicken begins. That's what it is, folks. And you write the reality of the debt ceiling and mint the coin. Now, we're going to talk about this because this is very interesting. Jeff writes, the president of the United States has the legal authority to end the debt ceiling crisis entirely and at any time by merely choosing to do it. Okay, this is critical. And right off the top, the first sentence here, Jeff, because there's a lot of finger pointing amongst the politicians and people that are, patrons of both political sides here. Democrats are at fault, Republicans are at fault. But you're saying that this can be resolved with a stroke of a pen or just some action by Joe Biden.
It absolutely can. He has the legal option. There is a legal option. There is the law, the text of the law, and a link to the law is in this post. If you scroll down, and can we talk about the nature of debt briefly?
Yeah. You've mentioned before that debt, as we understand it in our households and our homes, is not debt as it applies to the government. That's key, right?
That's key. So there's another post which is linked somewhere in here. It's about the difference between national debt and personal debt. We are conditioned by the news and by powerful people to think that the national debt is the same as personal debt. So when I go to a bank and I get out a loan, I'm immediately, instantly in debt for that entire loan. If I get out $1,000, I immediately owe that bank $1,000 plus interest. I'm not out of debt until I pay back the entire loan. I'm in debt. That's personal debt. I can't create money. The government can create money. So debt to them, there's two critical elements to personal debt. Number one, between the borrower and the lender. Bank and a person, there is a higher authority. There's a government above both of us, right?
Yeah.
There's a government above the bank and a government above the lender, the borrower. And there's also an incredible power imbalance between the borrower and the lender. The bank can make my life miserable. They have the powers of the state at their disposal if I don't pay back my loans. That is an incredible power imbalance. The government has no equivalent. So when you say the government borrows its own money from China, first of all, that makes no sense because China doesn't make our money. Only we make our money. So there is no higher authority above the United States and China. There's no authority above them. And number two, there is no dramatic power imbalance between China and the United States. Roughly speaking, they're about the same power. So if the bank comes and tells me you haven't paid back your loan, you're in, or if the mob comes and we're going to break your legs. They're way more powerful than me. The bank is way more powerful than me. If China hypothetically said, we want our money back, we lent you your own money, which makes no sense, but we lent you your own money and you're going to pay us back, or what? They're going to meet the US military. There's no higher authority, and they're essentially equal peers. So the nature of debt in the national context for countries like the United States is completely different than personal debt. And it is essentially a choice. Debt in the national context is a choice. Debt in the personal context is an inherent, inseparable part of what the nature of it is. So I lost track of how we began this, but the nature of debt really puts it into perspective that why do we have a ceiling on something that's a choice? We definitely have to constrain our own debt, but in the national context, debt is a choice. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Well, I mean, that dovetails very nicely here with the debt ceiling from different perspectives that you mentioned, from a financial point of view, from a legal point of view, from a political point of view. And that's what we were talking about. And I always tell people on the podcast, when it comes to what ails us, what affects us here in this world community that we live in, people say, follow the money. I always say, no, follow the banking. And that's got a lot to do with it. So as we look at this, Jeff, anything here in this section that I'm scrolling through that you want to hit on?
I do not see the article on the screen.
Okay. You don't
can
see
tell
it up
me.
there. All right. So, let me see.
I mean, I wrote it, so I know it pretty well. So just tell me where you are.
Yeah. Well, it's the debt ceiling from different perspectives that I was bringing
sure.
up there. Yeah. And you have the three areas here: the financial point of view, the legal point of view, and the political point of view.
The nature of debt in the national context has nothing to do with the nature of debt in the personal context. From a financial point of view, the debt ceiling is a needless, pointless, self-chosen constraint. We don't have to have it. The only reason we have it is because they say we need to have it. We can choose not to have it. From a legal point of view, it is the law because they make the laws and they chose to make it the law. So if we violate the law, then there are consequences, whatever consequences are in the law. But they choose what is law and what is not law, and they could choose for this not to be law. And of course, as soon as we're right up against the wall of, oh, maybe we're going to default, then of course they're going to raise the debt ceiling. Yeah. So is it really a law? Is it really an inherent scientific natural thing, or is it a choice? And it's choice. From the political point of view, and obviously, you could have your own different opinions. From my instinct, from the political point of view, the debt ceiling is a tool to deprive the poor, but to pretend that you don't want to deprive the poor. That's my belief. That's my instinct. That's my belief. I want to give benefit of the doubt to the powerless, those with no money and no power. And that is my instinct.
Well, let's hit on that a little bit, because I was struck with this the first time that we met and talked. And you make an excellent point that being wealthy and enjoying the absolute best that the world, such as it is, has to offer is to not just have a lot, it's to have a lot more. There has to be that separation between them that ain't got it and them that does. And that really is what this is all about.
Right. It's not about having a lot. You can't be rich by having a lot. The only way that you can be rich and powerful is by having a lot more than everyone else. So if everyone has $1 million, nobody's rich. There's a line from The Incredibles, the boy in the car. But if everyone's special, then no one's special, right? So that's essentially the concept. So yes,
that's great. I want to get down here because I try to hold my podcast around half an hour. So I think sometimes these things go on a little too long, but this is something that a lot of people are not aware of, and it's this heading that you have, Mint the effing coin. And I don't.
yeah.
We gotta talk about this because most people are not aware of this. And you write this reality is especially revealed by an obscure 1996 law. So this is an ancient history, folks.
No, I
That
think it was
allows
Clinton, right? Clinton
yeah,
administration.
Clinton's that allows the United States president via the Treasury and the Mint to create a coin stamped with any value he pleases at any time he likes by merely deciding to do it. He or she. The only quirk is that it must be made of platinum.
Right.
Here's the section of the federal law that makes this possible. And you show that section of the federal law. I don't know. That kind of gives me the heebie jeebies, Jeff, because
Why?
I'm not a conspiracy theorist guy by and large. I mean, I don't buy into a lot of this. People will look at a dollar bill and they look at the different insignias and they talk about the Masons and the secret societies and all that stuff. And I'm like, I don't believe in that crap. But when you tell me that the debt crisis can be averted or ended by the president simply authorizing the minting of a coin made out of platinum, that's weird, Jeff. I mean,
It is weird. It's totally weird. It's totally weird, but it will end the crisis. It's legal. You have the sources to see for yourself. In that article, it has a link to the federal law, which you could see for yourself. That's what it does. And there's a large legal analysis paper by Rowan Gray. There's a full length book by Joe Firestone that go into this much more in depth. We have a legal solution on the books right now that the president can do by merely deciding to do it via the Treasury and the Mint to mint a coin. It is totally weird. It is totally weird, but it will end the crisis. Or we could choose to not do something totally weird and legal and available, and we could default, or we could shut down the government, which would cause real world suffering for millions of government employees that will not get their paychecks and millions more that will not get the critical services that they need. So I think that's a little more weird to choose that, to choose real world suffering when we have the availability of a law, which is weird, but it will end the crisis immediately. And in fact, as it says further down in the article, if we went really big, it would end much more than just the the debt ceiling crisis.
Well, like I said, I'm kind of amazed that more people aren't aware of it. And then I also think, and maybe this is pure coincidence, but these two big spending bills coming up, the infrastructure bill, the reconciliation bill, and just coincidentally, here comes the debt ceiling crisis to make everybody aware about the calamity that we have with our national
coincidentally, right.
Yeah, I mean, is it a coincidence or something more than that? Are they too dumb or are they in on it? That's what I say on my podcast all the time, and it really is an amazing coincidence, and probably should be thought of as being more than that.
Can I interject something?
Yeah.
So something very important about the coin. The coin is not something that the president can just go on a spending splurge. That money does not pour into the economy. The only thing that coin is allowed to be used for is for money that Congress has already appropriated. So if he does a $5 trillion coin, if Congress has not appropriated $5 trillion in spending, it cannot be spent. It would be held, the remaining balance would be held in the Treasury and the Mint until a future date when Congress appropriated that much more. So for example, if there's $2 trillion in spending by Congress and Biden created a $5 trillion coin, only $2 trillion of it would be allowed because only $2 trillion was authorized by appropriated by Congress. So it is not something that just pours money into the economy and worry about inflation. No, it is only for what Congress has already decided to do.
I mean, I hate to be a rube out here, I mean, this is just amazing to me. Okay, this coin, why is it made out of platinum? And are we talking about a physical minting of a coin that has a $5 trillion value on it? Yeah.
The law is like just a very couple sentences. Read the law. It says it must be platinum. Whatever the text of that law, if you have that in front of you, it just says can mint any coin as long as it's platinum. A platinum bullion, I think it says. It's just a quirk. It's just a quirk in the law. That's what the law says. I think it was intended to be a kind of commemorative memorabilia thing. And I mean, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have realized that it could be used for something so important.
Great. Well, I promised I like to do this before we get to the end because then we run out of time and there's never enough time to do it. But that we would take guests or comments from viewers, and we've
Oh,
got
I'd
one
love to.
here.
I'd
Yeah,
love
we've
to.
got.
I don't see them myself.
Well, I'll just read this one to you because the way that I came to Jeff and the reason he's on the podcast actually is because of Ron Placone, who I'm a big fan of. He appears on the Jimmy Dore show, and Ron's got his own show, and he's got his websites and music and stuff like that. I'm a patron of his, and Jeff guests on Ron Placone's show all the time. And that theme song that you hear that opens my show, a lot of the time we heard the blues from our good friend Bob Pace today, but a lot of times it's Ron Placone's theme song that'll open up podcast by George. But this viewer apparently has seen you out there with one of those guys in the gang out there in California, Graham Elwood. It says, I saw some of Jeff's stuff on Graham's show before. His description of the 600 ship Navy was neat. So I'm not exactly that.
600 ship Navy.
Yeah, I think that probably has something to do with Graham, and he does the thing with Lee Camp on government conspiracies and all that, and probably has to do with our fleet and the size of it and how the spending for that is a boondoggle, and maybe how that interrelates all into.
I did introduce MMT to Graham Elwood, and that was just an unreal, amazing experience. I've been on his show several times, not quite recently, but I'm not exactly sure about the 600 whatever you just said regarding the military. That sounds unfamiliar to me, but Graham Elwood is awesome. And he's great.
Yeah. From a viewer also, maybe you're aware of this because you can't be a student of MMT like Jeff is without being aware of Stephanie Kelton. I mean, she is the
the name sounds familiar, but
yeah,
I'm just kidding.
That's the
I'm just kidding.
You heard of the Godfather. I refer to her as the godmother of MMT. And this viewer writes that she finally got a TED Talk, which I'm not aware of. Did you see that? Do you know what that is? Did she get to?
I did.
Yeah.
She all of her talks are great, and she gave a 15 minute talk. And the TED Talks, TED Talks, 2 months ago, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This kind of goes to what we talked about before. I came out of right field and asked you whether or not you thought that, the snowball was building for MMT, that it was becoming more in the nation's conscience, whether or not it was catching on and more people were buying into it. But Stephanie Kelton appearing on a TED Talk now is a good example. Jeff, do you think that, is that working? Is this growing? Do you think is your experience and with just the way people respond to MMT, are we getting some eyes opened out there or not? Do you think?
I think actually Mint the Coin is making a significant difference. It's not directly MMT, but it has been. I think it's fair to say that MMTers have been at the head of this issue from the very beginning. Carlos Mucha is who discovered it in, I think, 2011, and then Joe Firestone wrote a full book on it, and then Roland Gray has done a legal analysis recently. And so they're all MMTers. They've all been at the forefront of this issue. So even though it's not directly considered, MMT concepts, MMTers have been at the forefront of this. And so it's kind of tangentially caused people to be more aware of it. And Bitcoiners, some significant amount of Bitcoiners are pushing for Mint the Coin.
Yeah.
Paul Krugman, who is not very friendly to MMT, has actually been pushing Mint the Coin. So it's kind of, in that sense, it's been a good thing. And again, you're talking with you, I didn't realize how important Mint the Coin was until after we spoke. I didn't realize how important the connection was between the debt ceiling and Mint the Coin was until after I started doing the research for talking with you. And now it's just like they go together. That you can't separate these two issues.
I just got okay. So a guy becomes president of the United States. I mean, he gets the hotline, the red phone in the Oval Office where he can speak directly to the Kremlin if he needs to. He gets the football with the nuclear codes and that type of thing. Do you think Biden, particularly when people question exactly where he's at, is he aware of this Mint the Coin thing? Does he know that he can do this just by, pushing the button, so to speak? And then, $1 trillion. You talked about the face value of this being $5 trillion, possibly $1 trillion. Again, I mentioned Lee Camp earlier. It's a stack of $1,000 bills, if they were printed, which they're not, we only have $100 denominations in the United States. But if we printed a $1,000 bill, it would be a stack of them 67 miles high to equal $1 trillion. And again, to me, that says that this is all just phony baloney money. MMT is probably correct. This is money that you can't count or even comprehend. And if we issue a coin, do we just do this once? Does that cover it? Or do we do $1 trillion coin every 10 years or something? Or what's your thinking on that?
Well, do we want to get beyond the debt ceiling, or do we want to end austerity politics forever? So if we want to get through this debt ceiling, then just issue a coin for whatever the Congress has appropriated to have already have appropriated, whatever. I don't know what the amount is, 3.55 trillion, whatever it is. Just issue exactly that. We'll get through this this debt ceiling crisis, no problem. Do we want to get through the next few debt ceiling crises? Then maybe make it 5 trillion, maybe make it 10 trillion. Do we want to end austerity politics forever? Then make it 100 trillion, make it 200 trillion, make it a quadrillion. Doesn't matter what it is, because no matter what it is, when someone says, how are you going to pay for it? Because it will add to the debt. Coins don't add to the debt. Remember, I said that in a national context, debt is a choice. Some money adds to the debt, some money doesn't. And the debt is not the same as that money. So when Congress passes a law and they appropriate spending for that law, the debt is created alongside of it. The bond sales are created alongside of it, in addition to it. It's not the same. For us, it's the same. That money is debt. We're putting debt in the personal context. Coins don't create debt. So when you create a coin, you don't sell bonds along with it. Bonds are debt. Bonds are the definition of the national debt. So when you create a coin, it doesn't create the national debt. So we choose for coins to not create debt. So we have a quirk in the law where we can get around the net that doesn't create debt, doesn't add to the national debt, can't violate the debt ceiling. So if we create $100 trillion, $200 trillion coin, we could reach the point where we would never add to the national debt. And then everyone who says, oh, but that's going to explode the debt, then we can turn around and say, no, we already got the coin that's ready to pay for it.
Now, that doesn't mean that we won't have economic ills that were forever good. I mean, all of those things are still out there, right?
The real world is still out there. But the people that say, how are you going to pay for it, no longer will be able to say it. The people that say, though, what about the debt? That scaremongering will no longer be there. That doesn't change the real world. You know, if we give everybody $200,000 and say, you got a house, everybody gets a house. We don't have enough builders and supplies and land and everything out there to do it. It will cause calamity. But we certainly have the resources to give everybody an education. We could certainly build schools and have professors and we certainly have those resources. So the real world still exists. We are all limited by the real world, including the national government. We're limited by money as individuals. They're not limited by their own money. We're not limited by our own words. I have the unlimited capacity to make my own words, and I can use my words to help, hurt, or neglect. They have the unlimited capacity to create their own money. They are not limited by their own money. So the trick is, everyone has constraints. The trick is to determine which are real and which are fake. For us, we are constrained by money in the real world. For them, they are constrained by the real world, not their money.
Well, a perfect example, wouldn't you agree? Again, I talked about these two bills that are now moving through Congress. We have this infrastructure bill. We have the reconciliation bill. We have these climate change mitigation things that are in here. And a lot of people are looking at that and saying, we can't afford that. Where are we going to get the money for that? Again, they're referring to the national debt and this limited amount of money. And this could eliminate that argument. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't find some other way to circumvent this for whatever reason, maybe to,
of course,
to protect the financial interests of the petroleum companies and all that. But that argument would be out the window, right?
The financial argument is false, but they hide behind these things that people believe. The debt ceiling, how are you going to pay for it? Inflation, the boogeyman, not real inflation, the boogeyman. They hide behind these things to say that I can't. I want to, but I can't. When they really mean, of course I could, I just don't want to. But they don't want to admit that publicly because they would be, the public would not take to that very well. But a lot of the public is deceived into believing that Depriving the poor is unfortunate but necessary. And we know that it's not. Of course we can provide for the poor. They don't want to provide for the poor. Why don't they? Well, so my instinct, I can't prove this, my instinct, my strong instinct is they don't want to provide for the poor. And the question is why? Why don't they provide for the poor? Is it because they can't and they're really ignorant of how things work? Or is it because there's something darker that we're not seeing?
Well,
I know what my opinion is.
like I mentioned, they want to keep that separation between them and the poor, the lesser classes. And then they also believe, and they've been raised this way, and that's the class situation that we have in America, that they are better prepared and better suited to be in these control of these levers of power in monetary policy. They're better to have the money than the masses are, the dirty people down below them. They'll allocate it. They'll let it trickle down, let it start with them, and they'll handle it. But of course, look at where we are today. And I keep going back to this climate situation. My God, what a mishandle this has been. It's time that we need to change that model. And Jeff, I know that you study MMT and you like to keep within the constraints of that, but it's intertwined with politics. And when you look at it, how do you feel about these two political parties? We really only have the two with power in the United States, the Democrats and the Republicans. The way that I put it to people on my podcast is that the Republicans want to kill us with a blow to the head with a blunt instrument, basically. That's how Donald Trump struck me, and didn't care what you thought of it. Then you've got the Democrats that are coming along. Climate's a good example again, where they're going to kill us by death from 1,000 paper cuts. I mean, we're going to get there, and that is dead. It's just going to be a slower process without that fatal blow to the head. Do you think MMT, and again with this mint the coin thing, are there some friends in the Democratic Party more than the Republicans, or they're both equally about the same on this issue?
This is my opinion. This is not MMT. This is my opinion. Republicans want to kill us fast. Democrats want to kill us slow.
Mm-hmm.
They both want to lavish their own. They both want to deprive the poor. The question is which oligarchs do they want to lavish? And the oligarchs that the Democrats want to lavish are slightly nicer, less racist than, or at least overtly racist than the ones that the Republicans want to lavish. That's my opinion. Obviously, that's not MMT. Climate change, I think in probably several decades from now, the population of Earth will be probably around maybe 1 billion. We currently have, 8 billion?
Yeah.
And how do we get there from here? Even if we have 100 years to get from 8 billion to 1 billion, that's going to take some serious organization. And I don't think we're there yet. And I think the path that we're on is that's becoming inevitable. And it's going to happen. Is it going to be controlled, or is it going to happen not controlled? And at the rate we're going now, I think it's going to be uncontrolled. And that's pretty distressing. And you said politics. You said that something to the effect, I know I'm kind of wrong with how I'm saying this, but roughly you said that, I don't want to get into politics because I want to stick with MMT. That's my wheelhouse. I would argue that MMT shows that politics is all that matters. And that those in power, those that want to deceive, those, neoclassical economics that wants you to think that money is all that matters. Politics has nothing to do with it. And MMT actually shows that money has hardly anything to do with it. Politics is all that matters, because money is simply the manifestation of our decisions. It's a manifestation of power. And the government uses money to give to those who they want power, those who they want to have power, those who they want to have the decisions over resources and labor and people. And they don't give it to people. They don't give it to those who they don't want to have power. They withhold it from those who they don't want to have power. So money is nothing more than a manifestation of their politics. So I would argue MMT actually shows the opposite, which is that politics is all that matters, and money is simply the very final step that is the manifestation of those decisions.
My God, that's well stated. And I just checked my clock. We're running out of time, I probably should have known that. Yeah, folks, Jeff's the host of Activist MMT. It's a podcast. I mean, he does this a lot. He's really good at this. So, I mean, he can take the ball and run with it, which is what he's done here. And I mean, that's great. And I kind of want to turn it over to you here, Jeff, to wrap up. Give us a little summary here and a summation, particularly as we approach this October 19th thing. I mean, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to be inundated with this debt ceiling scaremongering stuff. They'll push it right right up to the deadline. There might be an extension. I don't know if they're going to push us over the precipice this time or not. It could get hairy. It has in the past. What do you think is going to happen between now and then? And what's your advice? What do you want people to think about as they see this news come down, like this article that I started off with from CNN?
I wish I wish people would take a look at my article, not even necessarily to read what I wrote, but just to please consider the sources that I link to, particularly Joe Firestone's book, Rowan Gray's illegal analysis, and the sources that people can learn more for themselves and see the law for themselves. They could see, there it is. There's the text of the law. That's the whole thing, that little paragraph, and there's a link to the law so you can see for yourself. To go into my article, not necessarily to read it. I mean, please do. I think it's good. But go into my article so you can see these sources for yourself, so you can find out more for yourself. You cannot know which direction to turn unless you have the correct map. And MMT is an accurate map of the economy. This particular post and the sources it links to is an accurate map of the debt ceiling crisis and the mint the coin, which is the potential solution for the debt ceiling crisis. Getting rid of the debt ceiling entirely, not just raising it, getting rid of the concept, that's the solution. But we ain't there yet. So until that day, minting the coin is the solution. And it is a silly one, but it's not as silly as causing real world suffering for millions. So learn what you can learn so you don't get deceived by people who pretend that they know more than you and that you can't understand things unless you have a Harvard PhD. No, you can. You can understand things. And if you don't understand things, there's a relationship between you and what you're trying to understand. Are you not able to understand it, or is it not understandable? It's got to be some combination of the two. And if you only blame yourself, I think that that's not a reasonable estimation.
Well, that's great. I'm going to thank you for coming on this edition of Podcast by George. We'll check back here. Maybe again, I just got a feeling with the acrimony and the partisanship that's out there and these different issues that are being fought over and what we've been through in the last year, that this October 19th deadline thing is going to get really scary this time around. We'll check in with Jeff again. Jeff, I'm going to end here. I'm going to play this to kind of take the live stream out after we sign off with this. I am the very model of a modern monetary theory parody
gosh,
song.
You kidding me?
Yeah. And I can do that on the live stream here. We'll just fade out with that. I mean, this is great. But I just preface this a little bit. It's a parody. It's meant to be funsies here. I mean, we're talking Al Yankovic stuff.
So I wrote this 2 years ago. It's based on, if people know they either know the opera or they don't. I wrote the parody. I recorded it. I'm a classically trained singer, so I recorded it with a local choir, and it's turned out great. And my son has a little monologue near the end, which I love, and it's accurate. It's almost entirely accurate, and very, very small little things that I had to, because of the lyrics and the shortness and all that. But it's an introduction to MMT, and it's really cool that you discovered that. I'm very surprised to hear this. So, George, thank you so much for having me on. I'd love to talk again, and I enjoyed it last time, and this is great. So
I will do it and say hi to our folks out there on the left coast. I mean, they're out Ron Placone and Graham Elwood and those folks that are out in California that you talk with. Jeff's on the other coast, and I'm kind of stuck here in the heartland. Jeff Epstein, host of Activist MMT. Thanks again for coming on Podcast by George. We're going to hear this song.
Thanks, Serge.
All right, pal. Here we go. Let's see if I can get this to fire up. So play away here. There it goes. So I think it starts off here silent, doesn't it? Am I not set to play music here? Doggone it.
I hear it.
Oh, you can hear it. Okay, good. I just can't. Okay, that's great.
The very model of a modern monetary theory, where all bad spending's always paid for with created currency, which logically extends
Nope.
morality. They also control inflation, and of course they drive the currency. Yes, taxes are currency, improves morality. They also control inflation, and of course they drive the currency. The federal government does not care about money.
money. It only cares about the resources it has domestically. It provisions itself by making people do all that it needs. Then pay the money which the people can do with it as they please. And this is what we lovingly call debt-free savings.
Then pay the money which the people can do with it as they please. And this is what we lovingly call debt-free savings. The central bank creates currency using a computer. They give the banks more reserves by making numbers bigger. Reserves to banks are just like bank accounts to me and you. But for us, our banks are in our town next to the sewer. We must pay taxes or our things will be all confiscated. And then if we still do not pay, we'll be incarcerated. This is our fate we don't create, we must get it from somewhere. But where? Where? Yes, of course. Like from a job, or local mob, or beg or steal or credit card. We need a job to get some money so we can pay taxes. We need a job to get some money so we can pay taxes. This is our fate we don't create, it's not that great, we don't choice in the matter. The very model of a modern monetary theory by Mosler, Mitchell, Ray, Fulweiler, and Kelton Stephanie. The federal job guarantee and ZERP are recommended, but otherwise it just describes, that's all that is intended. The federal job guarantee and ZERP are recommended, but otherwise it just describes, that's all that is intended.
Banks also create money, but it's very different, as you'll see. They're franchised by the government, but what they make is not debt-free. If you don't pay them back, your life will be infinite misery. It's private debt. If it's not met, it just keeps growing bigger.
Listen to what will we do? The debt collectors call. I cannot pay, I'll always pay, my income needs on full. We need some full employment so we can tell our boss to be strong and sad.
But really, the federal job guarantee is a permanent, counter-cyclical, automatic macroeconomic stabilizer of prices and wages by using a buffer stock of the employee to even out the business cycle, thereby preventing the majority of inflation. Ex ante.
The very model of a modern monetary theory by Mosler, Mitchell, Ray, Fulweiler, and Kelton Stephanie. The federal job guarantee and ZERP are recommended, but otherwise it just describes, that's all that is intended. The federal job guarantee and ZERP are recommended.